Have you ever had someone notice that your mind had drifted? And they say, "Pay attention." It might have been in school, or it might have been a significant other in your life, such as a parent, a spouse, or a child. It was a call to refocus your mind. A grandmother had told her granddaughter, "Tomorrow we're going to church." "I don't like church," the granddaughter said. "We need to learn more about God," replied the grandmother. The granddaughter said, "Well, I learned about him last week." The grandmother said, "Well, I've been going to church all my life and I haven't learned enough." The granddaughter replied, "Well, maybe you just weren't paying attention." So I don't know about you, but I am being inundated with the world around me to pay attention. I constantly am receiving email that I discard just as quickly. People keep urging me to see something on Facebook that they feel is very important. We are now in the midst of a presidential campaign and the possibility of impeaching the current president. You know, he who shall not be named. I read the Press Journal and the New York Times daily to kind of know what's going on in the world. I watch MSNBC and CNN as well as PBS to keep up with current events. With the 24/7 news cycle, one could drive themselves crazy just following all of this. Anyone feel like that? That you're just inundated, overwhelmed? Well, when I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee in the 1950s, we didn't even have a TV in my earliest years, as I recall. After we bought a TV, we had 3 basic channels. And we watched the news only at 6 p.m. We got the morning and the evening papers, which contained local stories more than national or international ones. And that was it. It was only later that the TV station started the late news at 10 p.m. I like to tell people that I was born in BC, before computers. There was no such thing as email, Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, or an alphabet list of other ways to stay plugged in and turned on. If you wanted to communicate with someone back then, you picked up a telephone or you wrote them a letter, which took a little time. Humans have been evolving for thousands of years, but these last 100 years or so have accelerated our connection to one another. First, there was the telegraph, then the telephone, then the radio, then the teletype, then the television, and finally the personal computer. We are in information overload most of the time now. What is a person to do to stay sane in the cacophony of this onslaught to our eyes, ears, and mind? Now, Krista Tippett is a journalist who delves into the spiritual side of our lives. You may listen to her on the radio show that comes on Sunday morning at 7 o'clock. Some of you may be not up yet. But the program is called On Being. She interviews a wide variety of people to hear their insights about what it means to be a human being in the contemporary world. Recently, she allowed the tables to be turned on her and answered a question from her listeners. she was asked this question: how can we stay present to what's happening in the world without giving in to despair and hopelessness? Well, here's a little bit of what she had to say. I think it's important, first of all, to acknowledge the pain and dismay and distress and despair that just following the news, that being present to what's happening in the world right now causes. And I don't think that this is all that imaginative, but for me, one way I stay grounded is by limiting my exposure to what I'm taking in. And that's not choosing to be uninformed, but I don't actually think we are equipped, even physiologically or mentally, to be delivered catastrophic and confusing news and pictures 24/7. We are analog creatures in a digital world. So I don't follow what happened in the last 20 minutes all day long, and I think that's actually right now a spiritual discipline. She goes on to say that she limits the amount of information she receives so she can focus on other important things like the good that is all around us. The other spiritual discipline, she goes on to say, and way to stay grounded, is that however seriously we must take what's happening in the world and what the headlines are reflecting, it is never the full story of our time. It's not the last word on what we're capable of. It's not the whole story of us. For Krista Tippett, we need to see that we humans are capable of more than causing hurt and corruption and failing. We are capable of helping and healing through many individual acts that we can do every day. We can bring more hope into the world. She said, there is a narrative of healing and of hope and of goodness, and we also just, as a discipline, have to take that in as well. Not instead of, but the both and of humanity and of our world. And I think it's only in doing that that we keep flexing and strengthening our hope muscle, she continues. Hope is a muscle. It's a choice. It's a vigorous choice to see what is wrong and what needs healing and needs repair and needs our attention, and also to keep our hearts and our imaginations and our energy oriented toward what we want to build, what we want to create, what we're walking towards. So take the work of several of our members who have been knitting hats and scarves to send through our Unitarian Universalist Service Committee to places that we may never visit. Doyle tells me that we are the only church that he knows of that adds these tangible offerings to the UUSC partners in the world. The story this morning told about this important way of sharing hope somewhere in the world through these gifts that are before us. We also have our caring cloaks that we give to members who have lost a loved one. When my brother died, I received one, and I continue to use it. These human creations say that there are others who care, and we have more hope that life will get better. We are paying attention to those in need. It all comes down to where I place my attention. Several years ago, an experiment was tried at Princeton Seminary. They recruited seminary students for a study on religious education. First, they completed personality questionnaires about their religion. Later, they began experimental procedures in one building and then told the students to go to another building to continue. On the way, they encountered a man slumped in an alleyway. The victim's condition is unknown. Hurt? Drunk? They varied the amount of urgency that they told the subjects before sending them to the other building, and the task that they would do once they got there. One task was to prepare a talk about seminary jobs, and the other one was the story of the Good Samaritan. In one condition, they told the subject that they were late for the next task. In the other, they said, well, you have a few minutes, but you should head on over anyway. So what do you think they found? What do you think? The amount of hurriness induced in the subject had a major effect on helping behavior, but the task variable didn't, even when the talk was about the Good Samaritan. Overall, 40% offered some help to the victim. Pretty good. In low hurry situations, 63% helped. Medium hurry, 45%. And high hurry, 10%. Ironically, a person in a hurry is less likely to help people, even if he is going to speak on the parable of the Good Samaritan. We need to slow down from all the busyness if we are to cultivate a more helping attitude. When I was working downtown, I would be approached by a person asking for money. If I wasn't in a hurry, I would talk to the person and I would give them something. But if I felt that I was late to be somewhere, I would brush them off. Now that I'm retired partially, what is my excuse for not paying attention to those who are hurting and in need of help? And it isn't the only thing that we need to pay attention to in our lives. We also need to pay attention to bringing more joy into the world. Krista Tippett said, and so, we have to, at the same time that we act and speak and think critically about what's happening in the moment, we have to embody and walk with and towards how we want to live in contrast to that, how we want to live beyond this. We cannot call forth in the world something that we don't embody. And an ability to be able to take joy is, and she goes on to say, I've been in rooms full of very well-meaning, good people who are doing good work in the world for whom I think the idea that you should have joy, any joy, in a moment like this, would be a betrayal of what is right and just and good, would perhaps be a denial or even a diminishment of people who are in pain right now. It is a both and that we need to cultivate. Pay attention to bringing more justice into the world, but also to bring more joy as well. If we focus on what is really important, then it is possible for us to have this both and way of being. A philosophy professor stood before her class and had some items in front of her. When the class began, silently she picked up a large empty mayonnaise jar and proceeded to fill it with rocks. show and tell. She then asked the students if the jar was full. They agreed that it was. So the professor picked up a box of pebbles and poured them into the jar. And to make this work right, I'm going to take a couple out so I can... I got too many rocks. Children, don't try this at home. She shook the jar lightly, and the pebbles, of course, rolled into the open spots. She then asked the students again if the jar was full. They agreed again that it was. They weren't as smart as whoever's over here saying it. The professor then picked up a box of sand and poured it into the jar. Of course, the sand filled up everything else. Now, said the professor, I want you to recognize this is your life. The rocks are the important things. Your family, your partner, your health, your children, bringing joy and justice into the world. Things that if everything else was lost and only they remained, your life would still be full. The pebbles. The pebbles are the other things that matter, like your job, your house, your car, your church. The sand is everything else, the small stuff. If you put the sand into the jar first, there's no more room for the pebbles or the rocks. The same goes for your life. If you spend all your time and energy on the small stuff, you will never have room for the things that are important to you. Pay attention to the things that are critical to your happiness. Play with your children. Take time to get medical checkups. Take your partner out dancing. Bring joy to others. There will always be time to go to work or clean the house or give a dinner party or fix the disposal or any of those things that are there that need to be done, but they're not as critical. Take care of the rocks first, the things that really matter. Set your priorities. The rest is sand. Pay attention. Pay attention to what is important. Like the story of the old woman's epitaph in the New England cemetery. Will you be able to state that you attended well and faithfully to a few good things, a few worthy things? We only have this one life to bring more joy, more love, more justice into the world. As Victoria Safford asked at the end of the reading about what your epitaph might say, how will it read? How does it read? And if you had to name a few worthy things to which you attended well and faithfully, what, I wonder, would they be? As analog creatures in a digital world, pay attention to the rocks, to what is important, and let the sand in your life go. I'll bet you feel better for having done it. Amen.